Hey everyone, and welcome back to the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Catch us on all those standard podcast locations and on our YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe and leave your comments in the sections below, and we'll get to them in some upcoming episodes. Um, everybody, as we're kind of sitting here, there's been some recent news in the stock market, specifically with EVs and Volkswagen electing to invest basically 5 billion total, 1 billion first and then 4 billion later into Rivian stock. So Rivian stock saw a pretty significant bump on that. I personally was a beneficiary of that. Don't know if either of you are participating in EV stocks right now. As a brief reminder, before we launch into this topic, nothing said on this podcast is investment advice. This is simply for entertainment, and do not listen to us when it comes to putting your money places, basically. But Josh, any kind of immediate response to the Rivian news? How you might think it plays in the broader EV market, or just kind of a blip?
Rivian stock is up 35% in the last 5 days as of recording. I think Rivian is establishing itself as a real player in this EV market with the partnerships with Amazon for their delivery trucks, and now with the Volkswagen. Have you seen the model design for the R3? It was launched before this partnership was announced, but it looks a lot like the Volkswagen Golf. And there are pictures going around about this on X, and I kind of love it. I kind of feel like I've got to get one of those. Before this announcement came out, I pre-ordered an R2, which is the smaller SUV model that's coming out in 2026. So I think Rivian is establishing itself as this EV industry is consolidating into the few main players that matter. Tesla obviously is the leader of this industry, but in many ways, BYD in China is also a leader in volume and in impact of EVs. And I think Rivian is establishing itself as one of those. There are some other companies that are also in the mix. What's fascinating to me is you saw this race of insurgents like Tesla and incumbents like the Volkswagens, the BMWs, Mercedes of the world, all take this platform shift and try to adapt to it. And what you've seen is that the incumbents have really struggled to get there. And you see this deal with VW, with Volkswagen's investment in Rivian, as a great example of an incumbent who tried to take on this very difficult platform change and then decided to partner instead with one of the leading ventures in that space.
I want to very quickly, before I pass to Lakshay on that, I want to just ask you a somewhat specific question. Do you think the partnership is more a product of a lack of technology innovation, or kind of based on the learnings that you can take from Tesla, do you think it's actually more about the assembly of the cars? Because like my kind of interpretation is that Volkswagen or BMW or any of these legacy car services aren't really that far behind in terms of the core battery technology. Maybe that's not really true, but that's kind of my interpretation of it. It does seem like retrofitting their already existing infrastructure, though, for the new assembly and the new manufacturing of EVs is where they're really falling short. So again, I'm just kind of curious as to where you think that partnership is most valuable from the VW side.
I think it's two things. I think it's clarity of focus. Number one, having kind of this pure focus of we're building electric from the ground up. We're going to infuse that into every component. But also just as importantly, I think it's brand. I think if you want an EV, if you want a leading EV, you want a network of chargers available to you, and you want to be part of that culture of EVs, you want to signal that to your friends. You can do that with a Tesla. You can do that with the very interesting design, the headlight design, the hood design of the Rivian as well. It sort of signals that outdoorsman style ethos in a way that buying a Volkswagen with an EV motor underneath doesn't.
At least with regards to the stock price, I'm not holding any. When Rivian IPO'd, I bought some, and I got very lucky, I guess, in that moment that I don't know what the instance was, because I'm looking at the stock graph and I was like, I don't know when the hell I sold, because it doesn't seem super amicable to the story I remember. But I got a 12% bump off of the price I bought post IPO, and I just instantly sold and walked away from it. My dad, unfortunately, saw the success I had with it. I was like, oh, I should definitely get it. And it just basically dipped from there on out to a solid 90%. I don't know if he's still holding. I should tell him about the bump that happened over the last 2 days if he hasn't already heard. But yeah, I think I don't know, Rivian and a lot of these electric companies, like it always seems like the place to get tripped up on if you want to one of these big companies is like the production supply chain. And it seems like Rivian suffered from that a lot. And I don't remember the details of this, but I just remember at least for a while there was a big issue I guess Rivian was having with inventory, like just people weren't buying enough of their cars. Um, but all that being said, like I recognize why Volkswagen did what they did in that like Rivian wanting to be like software first throughout a car feels like IP that's worth buying rather than needing to figure out yourself. You know, like if you could just treat it as like this is a new line, we just fund this company to like boost our revenue in the EV space. We know that they have a novel approach to EVs that's like gonna be hard if we want to set up ourselves and to do ourselves. Um, Rivian's figure out the formula, just bring them in to do that job, right? Um, I think I've never actually like experienced one of those cars myself. I've only ever like seen videos of them or seen them driving by. But all in all, like I'm pretty positive on EVs. I think like especially like given the way that like supercharger networks are being made more accessible to a bunch of different car company brands, whatever. As long as the underlying infrastructure for it is there, like I do believe things are on a pathway. Then like 20 years time, it's probably pretty realistic that majority of cars will be EVs. It's just, I think right now we're still in the kind of like colder start problem of like, there's pricing, there's a lot of inventory problems. I mean, we're in a time where like compute is hard to get anyway. There's just a lot of factors that go into going into making like a computerized car, and selling a computerized car that I feel like is just making it like a little slower than it would be in normal circumstances.
It's interesting that you mentioned the software because as you were saying that, I was remembering that recently there was an announcement, I believe, made by Porsche that they were basically going to fully integrate Apple CarPlay. And what's fascinating is for those in the audience that might not know, there's a intricate and completely intertwined history between Porsche and Volkswagen, up to the point where even right now, Porsche is technically owned by Volkswagen. However, the majority stakeholders in Volkswagen, the company, are actually members of the Porsche family. And so for anyone that's kind of interested in that kind of unique back and forth, I would encourage them to check out. There's an excellent episode on the Acquired podcast, actually, that details kind of that history in full. And so it's really fascinating. But to kind of bring this back to the point, software isn't something that I thought about first when I was kind of thinking about this deal. And I do wonder how that's going to play with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, I think is what it's called. Google, whatever Google's version is. But in any event, I hadn't really thought about the software angle, but that is kind of a fascinating take on it. So, yeah. And so like, I also think I was going to tie this into the kind of the broader EV market a little bit here. Lucid is the other one that has kind of reached prominence, but however has kind of fallen on hard times recently. However, they just received a pretty big bump from a Saudi investment group, maybe the Sovereign Wealth Fund, roughly a month ago, if my memory is correct. And I do think it's an interesting time in the EV market overall. Like we're seeing car prices across the board fall right now. And so I do wonder if, in some ways, this was an opportunistic purchase or investment by Volkswagen, and kind of something that Rivian needed in the form of a lifeline. So, one of the very few instances where it may have actually been a win-win. Shashi, sounds like you're gearing up there.
I love Marquise Brownlee's videos. I think they're great. He does great reviews of tech, including EVs, and he recently reviewed the Fisker Ocean, and said it was the worst car he's ever reviewed. So just thought it'd be worth adding that to this conversation, that there are these also rans in this case, and Lucid feels a little bit like an also ran, as does Fisker, and they seem to be too small and too niche and too far behind to be able to compete. And I wouldn't expect either of those companies to last.
Furthering that point, since that video has come out, Fisker has actually filed for bankruptcy. So, I mean, they're, while again, I think Lucid had themselves a lifeline, I'm not sure that Fisker is going to kind of ultimately survive. And I actually, again, my history on this is slightly fuzzy, but I believe this will be the second time Fisker has kind of quote unquote failed. It basically was alive, failed, was revitalized, and now essentially is failing again. So, tough time to be building hardware in general. I think. So, launching off on that point, speaking of things that are kind of failing at the intersection of hardware, those kind of things, we've seen a couple of different AI products that have come out that are, kind of quote unquote AI first in the hardware space that are also falling on hard times. So I'm wondering, Josh, if you got any thoughts on essentially Humane and Rabbit. And I mean, I think that we've made it known on the podcast that you actually pre-ordered the Humane AI pen. So I'm just curious if you even taken it out of the box yet. Is that something that you even have interest in doing? Just curious to get your thoughts.
I'm not taking it out of the box. It's sitting over here on my desk, but it's an interesting time in hardware, and I'm curious your thoughts as we've seen these two very significant investments, the Humane Pin and the Rabbit devices, not meet expectations, overpromise, underdeliver, and now I would expect unlikely to survive. Both of those companies are unlikely to go forward much longer. What would you like to see in the hardware space, given where we are with the platform shift to AI? What's realistic? What's feasible? What are some ideas or theories you have for winning hardware products?
I mean, like in general, like IoT to me is really fun. Like it's interesting. I think there is at some point like going to be a stage where in the same way, like if you have a house and you want to like add decor, add functionality to it, like let's say you very casually, right? You go onto like Amazon or some local retailer or whatever, you buy the thing you need. And that's like 20 to 30 bucks a pop to have that feature kind of embedded in your life, I guess. And for now, like obviously that means things like, I don't know, like pots, plants, like chargeables, things, whatever, right? I think there is hopefully, I think going to be a point where like IoT is commoditized enough that like you could do stuff like that. And like you could have stuff that's like electronically and like network engaged in a way that's like meaningful to one person's lifestyle or the way they try to interact with the world. I think like we see like obviously Alexas are probably like the cheapest and like highest return IoT device that is out there. But more stuff that's kind of designed to like interplay in an ecosystem and just kind of work out of the bat. I think that there is some interesting things that could happen there. Like, I think about all the time, like I have, at home, like I built this like pretty big home gym that like has a bunch of equipment, whatever. And all the time I keep thinking to myself, like, it'd be really cool to have like an intelligent thing, like watching my workouts, telling me how they're going, or like providing a timer, or like counting my gestures, all that sort of stuff, or like telling me how focused I was inside the gym. Right. Obviously that's super, super niche. It's just that like hardware products are just a little bit more expensive and more involved than something like that would be, right? It's not a trivial thing or not like a casual thing to pick up and buy. I think when you look outside of consumer, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that's happening, but that's at least coming from my perspective as like a buyer of like what I would want to get these days.
Yeah, I have two somewhat unrelated thoughts, but I don't know that we are going to see a demonstrative platform shift in the way of hardware in the way that we have before. Like, I don't know that AI is going to catalyze a transition from personal computer to mobile necessarily. It feels to me a little bit like and instead of or. And what I mean by that is like, it does feel like, in referencing Marquise Brownlee, as you did earlier, Shashi, he did a recent video on, is AI a feature or a product? I think it actually can be a product, but it's not clear to me yet that you need dedicated hardware for that product, meaning like why, if voice is I think most likely next modality, why you can't do that on something like the Alexa device that already exists, or your smartphone, or any other kind of standard Bluetooth speaker. I'm not exactly sure why you need a dedicated device to run AI or be AI first when smartphones are already very, very good. Thus, the barrier to entry is really quite large. The unrelated thought, or at least somewhat unrelated thought, is an extension of what Lakshay was saying earlier with regard to essentially the integration of data from his workouts. My hope for AI is that we can start to see a paradigm shift that has historically relied on manual human inputs in order to get data into some sort of engine to make these advanced insights. And AI provides an opportunity to be able to pull disparate disparate data, hopefully more automatically than manual human upload into kind of a centralized nexus point, such that, intelligent insights can be made out of it. So to Lakshay's point, maybe it's as simple as spinning up an iPhone camera that you record yourself with while you're working out. That then gets put into some sort of neural engine somewhere, and then you can actually get those insights that you're looking for. Fatigue, energy, performance that day, that kind of thing. So again, it feels to me like a lot of the hardware that is necessary for a lot of these things already exist. They're already, we have LiDAR on the cameras. We have some infrared on some of the Google Pixel cameras. So it's not immediately intuitive why, especially in the form of information gathering, you need a new dedicated hardware device. Conversations we may have later in this podcast will take that in a slightly different direction. But I think for the consumer use, unclear to me why the hardware that already doesn't exist isn't enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think bring up the example I very specifically did, where like I'm watching a workout and want to understand performance, whatever. Like there, I think you can make a pretty clear example out of it and say like, yeah, put like just posture an iPhone and have the iPhone recording you all the time. I think like that works generally. Like if you wanted to have like, if someone was going to like a public gym, right? You don't want like cameras everywhere, just like watching everyone trying to figure out who to send data to, right? With that being said, like I think like one thing that's kind of inherently part of the design of like any phone-based thing is that you're always opting in and triggering the reaction yourself, right? Like you always have to posture or set up the engagement with data in that way. I think like a lot of products are not designed to do like automated or like trigger detection or something like that, because obviously there's like privacy and stuff like that in the loop. But as we go closer to like these LMs can run locally, as we like find systems that like you can run like intelligent systems on the edge without ever talking to a server, I think there is a more interesting conversation that could come up where instead of saying we always have to call a server, the idea of like everything's running local, and instead of needing to trust my iPhone and put it in a place that is useful to me to then do the job I want it to do, like I think there's just more of an opportunity that has yet to really be explored of what does it look like if I'm not even thinking about what my device is, right? If I'm just going around and at the end of the day, I get like a report on my monitor about like, oh, I saw you did a workout today. Like your bench press looked awful today. And here's why, try this next time.
I've talked before about environmental sensors. I really like the 8 Sleep, for example, I used to wear an Oura Ring. I wore the Oura Ring for sleep detection primarily. So I'd wear it all day, but I'd make sure I wore it at night particularly so I could track sleep. And when I got an 8 Sleep and put that on my bed, I switched over to that being my primary sleep detection. Mm-hmm. I like non-wearables. I like environmental device that can monitor. And I have 2 items on my wish list for hardware that doesn't exist. One would help with traffic and car accidents. I think there's like so much opportunity to see, understand, and process kind of what's happening in traffic. If somebody's speeding, if somebody is driving erratically or cuts other people off, runs through red lights, or etc. There's something there about traffic monitoring as one component of a whole that if you imagine 1,000 people in a city thought that you'd have a pretty good amount of coverage and you could have some guardrails around what it could and couldn't monitor. But ideally you focus it on this very specific problem of when cars are interacting with each other, who's following the rules and who's not. It could be kind of an early detection of accidents or other incidents. So that's one kind of this traffic zone of problems. And 2 would be somewhat related, but not exactly, which is around home security. I think there's like opportunity for some roaming robotic devices or roaming sensors around your home to maintain a level of awareness and security, whether you're there or not there. If you're on vacation, kind of roughly what's happening in and around your home. Could be a neighborhood-oriented thing as well. So if you and your neighbors all purchase the same kind of system, you could have some sort of neighbor-wide awareness of what's happening. So again, these kind of environmental hardware devices I really like. And just conceptually, what have we built? We've had success with transformers. This transforming A to B is what all of the AI systems do to date. GPT is generative pre-trained transformer. That's the fundamental function of ChatGPT and any other kind of large language model today. I would like to see that move to router. I think there's a whole phase of kind of AI as router that could be really interesting. For example, if you detected something in this home security scenario or this traffic scenario where you need to route information immediately or smartly to your spouse, to the police, to some other scenario, that there'd be smart routing, as well as routing to and from other APIs that are available in the world. Perhaps the police have an API, or the fire system has an API, and so smart routing to and from APIs would be cool.
I'll know if I'm going to try and share a screen. I've never done this on here before, but I don't know if you've seen this product before, Shashi. Let's take a look at this. Are you seeing this? The Ring camera.
I've seen the Ring company, but I haven't seen this product.
It's I think it's only like, it was announced like many years ago, like purely in concept. I don't know if it's ever actually going to release, but it's kind of cool. Like, it's so like, it feels very like high schooler with like a batshit idea, in like the best way possible. And that's like a literal drone that flies around your house with a camera on it. And you can like pre-program like its paths and stuff, apparently. So like it can fly around like a designated space on like a cadence. Or you can like manually take it off when you're on like vacation or whatnot. Which is just like really cool. Like, admittedly, like,
yeah.
like the kid in me is like, that's sick. But it's very much closer to kind of what you're describing, like these like I think like as vision gets better and like basic robotics and like, I mean, like flight, like drones type flight's nothing new. But there's potential for something like that, you know, like we're in like a pretty interesting time that like stuff like this could more and more reasonably exist. I can imagine like if this thing is providing like a live feed to your phone, like this camera is working on live feed, like put GPT-4 vision on it, start giving instructions about where to turn instead of like needing to manually pilot it from wherever you're vacationing, you know? Just kind of cool.
I like it. It's sort of this bridge toward Minority Report. Yeah. You're probably too young, Lakshay, to know about Minority Report, but it's sort of like this precog idea. If you could have the AI precog and the sensors out there kind of monitoring stuff, and this drone concept could be one of those.
I think actually, Josh, I'm just going to build on your kind of security analogy and then parlay that or segue that into another topic we've got in the chat here, which is humanoid robots. It actually feels to me like that probably is the solve. I mean, you know, whether you believe Elon's speculation or not, let's just say that we are some time away in our lifetimes of humanoid robots. It feels like if you had a single humanoid robot that was capable of many functions in your home, security would at least logically be one of them. At the very least, surveillance, maybe not as a complete deterrent, although possibly as a deterrent, given that they're strong enough to lift, you know, pallets inside of warehouses or something like that. So I do, it feels like a natural progression of the Ring system that Lakshay just said is like Optimus kind of Overwatch in your home. So take that in whatever way you prefer. Lakshay, looks like you're eager to go there, but humanoids at the intersection of productivity and security. So feel free to run with that.
We got to place some bets on when, let's say Atlas or Humanoid or whoever shows a video of one of the robots doing jujitsu. What is the sentiment analysis going to look like in the comments section? Where are we placing our bets, fellas? I think with like robotics, like I think inherently, obviously none of this stuff has come with price tags. It's all been like demos. I mean, the Boston dog is something you can buy for like 7,000 or something like that, right? Or probably a lot higher. I don't know where I got 7,000 from. I think if I were to assume what the adoption pattern of like robotics looks like these like humanoid robotics, whatever, is that factories seem super obvious. I don't know how much of justification there really is for like specialized robotics versus like general human emulating. Obviously, Amazon is known for having this massive robotics fleet, but a lot of those are like tailored robots that are designed to do a very specific job. I believe Boston Dynamics already has adoption of some of their like lifting robots in factory settings. I think where you end up going like from a more like less proven ground is like, I think when you look at robotics in high hazard conditions, so like that could be like resolving firefighting, like chemical hazards, that sort of stuff, where like inherently a human is putting themselves in some level of danger to execute the thing necessary to solve the problem. That also feels really, really obvious as a place to kind of like begin putting these things more into the world. Like I could very much foresee that, like if humanoid or whoever puts out a robot that they are very comfortable saying like, this is a human, go nuts. I fully anticipate like one of the first places that pops up is probably like, I could see it sitting on a fire truck as a module that just like gets deployed with a button or something, right? I think in the human case, I think there's going to have to be a lot of time before it becomes something that like consumers adopt, obviously just probably price wise. I think the idea of like this robot butler is a very fun one. I think it's just like, it's going to have to be much more realistic cost wise. And like, I guess I think that there's more human centric design stuff to do there to figure out like, how do you let someone feel comfortable with this thing, like supposedly like quote unquote kind of living beside them, right? How much do you choose to make it feel human versus like treat it entirely automaton? And that sort of thing, which feels fairly unresolved in my head. I just can't imagine that like a normal family like living in just a typical like suburban city says, I see this robot and I'm comfortable with it all of a sudden, you know, especially like given all the conversation of that sort of like fear mongering that has surrounded AI in general.
It's an interesting point because, well, taking it one step at a time, the price point, I actually think maybe we already have our benchmark in basically the price of a nanny. And so like people are willing to pay a certain amount for childcare depending on people's socioeconomic status, their situation, how many kids they have, that kind of thing. That price can fluctuate, but it does feel like there's at least already almost a line item in people's, household budget, if you will, for professional aid, right? Whether that is kind of childcare explicitly or whether that is, something else. You can very well people have butlers or chauffeurs or kind of whatever. So it does feel like it's there. And so that's probably the price point that people are going to anchor on, right? If I trust a humanoid robot and I can pay them the same as what I would be paying a babysitter to take care of my house or my child or my dog or whomever, that feels like a relatively, standard one for one, again, overcoming the trust issue. So I think it was prescient of you to kind of point that out. I do wonder, and we kind of have a case study of this, not a true one-to-one, but I think one that we could pull from in driverless cars, right? The barrier to entry for driverless cars wasn't human level driving. It was essentially almost perfection. And so I do wonder if people are going to be receptive of humanoid robots, whether in their work or their home, if that same level of standard is going to be.
Yeah, I do also wonder. I mean, obviously the way we're seeing these like humanoid robots being trained, at least in like public videos, is like, it's all very sanitized, very, very perfect environments that like you give the robot, like some guy is walking around with like a motion capture little grabby thing as like emulating behaviors and capturing the robot what generally needs to be done. But especially like when you look at like, I would have to assume like all these robots are currently being trained for like factory environments where there's like a lot of strong like downlighting. Things are kind of like organized inherently. I think like if we were to look at like the consumer space, like there are so many other variables all of a sudden, like how much light is present in different parts of the house. That's always something that's very variable, right? There's like clutter. There's like all sorts of like visual noise that can appear on textures and surfaces. I would imagine that like it would take a lot more adoption or a lot more data collected in more human spaces to like actually be able to feed these things like correct behavior, right? It's not going to be like, if I took one of those robots that's doing a good job today, it could probably handle like maneuvering and interacting with a hospital pretty okay. But I wouldn't trust it to like deal with like a laundry room or like a laundromat or something where all of a sudden there's a lot more dynamism into like what humans have done in that environment and how it should make sense of the things in there.
I don't get the form factor. I don't get why Figure or Optimus needs to have a human-like form factor. It doesn't make sense to me. If the primary thing is our psychology and the way we interact with it, it doesn't feel like the right reason. I think Figure is going to go broke. I don't think they're going to exist as a company in a few years. I think they recently lost their CTO, who jumped ship. So that's my first reaction is like, this doesn't feel like good reasoning, at least as I can see. For example, I think it should be really use case dependent. And I think the use cases should be where humans aren't willing to or can't go. And I think that means you end up with much smaller sized robots for very specific kinds of scenarios. There are lots of very dangerous jobs. There's mining jobs, for example, that are very dangerous. You could design a robot form factor that would be optimized for that very specific task with the right kind of tools available on its body that doesn't need to look anything like a human. There's oil rigs as another example. These oil rig jobs, they have to pay someone with very little education 6 figures to go live out on an oil rig for a couple of months at a time, working 7 days a week. It's expensive. It's a dangerous job. It's dirty. It's unappealing, and that's why it's so expensive. And in those cases, I could see the special purpose designing a robot just for each task. And in a way, it's like factory automation, but it's factory automation with kind of free-flowing components that have an onboard amount of intelligence. They have primary tasking, but they have an onboard amount of intelligence that helps them kind of immediately react without having to send information back and forth to some controlling server. And I'm sorry, and last thought here, I'm the only one with kids on this pod. So my reaction to nanny is no. No way, no. You wouldn't want your robo nanny to accidentally squish your kid. I mean, there's just like too many things you would consider going wrong, right? I think a prior test to the nanny would be, would you put your kids in a robo taxi to send them to baseball practice? If you're not willing to do that, you're like multiple degrees away from having a nanny care for your children, and the kind of a open world amount of things that can happen and go wrong that, you know, a robot would have to learn how to react to, that you would just have very little trust they'd be able to figure out.
I think like on the context of like why a human shaped robot, I think all these companies are aspirationally trying to say like, we are going to develop like the human robot, like the one that's interacting and walking around the world the same way we are. I think that's obviously like a very sci-fi, very, very like visionary idea that a lot of people want to be the ones to hit. I think when I look at like practically why does it need to be human shaped, I think even like you see, I mean, even with ScholarAI, like the one paper that I keep on using for tests is like creating like a dexterous hand, like a robotic hand, right? But if you look at the context of like mining, or you look in the context of like security or something, right? In those sort of cases, you don't necessarily need a hand shape, right? You just need someone that can like hold an object or open a door, right? There's more optimized ways to probably do that. That's less technologically intensive. But I think with the aspiration of like wanting to create the generic human robot, the matter of fact is that like most things we've made in the world are designed to fit the human shape. So they're designed to interact with our hands. If we want to be on an oil rig and there's a valve that needs to be turned, it's designed to work with the way our muscles leverage mass and the way we're able to turn things in the height that those things are set at, right? And so it feels like we see like with the Atlas dog, like it's not like someone like threw a hand on that dog thing as like its main gripping feature. That's just like a typical claw that just opens up and down. That's functional. But for that reason, like we can't have like an Atlas dog like opening valves, right? Because that's a feature that's designed for the way human fingers can contort themselves and twist things. I just think that like, I do think it's hard. I think a lot of these companies are getting a lot of hype right now. I find myself a little bit more positive than I think I'm hearing you are, Shash, and just like what these companies can do. But I think a lot of that emerges from like DARPA contracts that keeps them alive for a long time, rather than like the consumer buying one of these robots, you know? Yeah, I think with the nanny point, like I probably agree. Like the idea of like one of these things walking around with like a kid in the same space and like trying to like pat it on the head, it just like grabs it too much and just like lifts it off the ground is the image that like instantly came to mind for some reason, which obviously is not super ideal for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, we sort of buried the lead here. The thing that prompted this conversation was that figure posted on June 20th that they are shipping a small fleet of humanoid robots to a client, and so that sparked us having this conversation.
And did they say that client was military or not?
They did not specify.
Okay.
No, my only thought to add there is, I guess twofold. Number one, Lakshay is at least correct in the best way that I've ever heard the argument articulated, is that if you build a general purpose robot, the world is essentially set up for human functioning. And so the logical leap there is that by building a quote unquote humanoid robot, it can interact with a world built for humans better than something else that would be general purpose is. And I do 100% agree that we are a long way from a fully autonomous nanny. I think my vision in outlaying that was less about nanny in the sense that you leave your children at home with them, and more in the sense that like they become an extra set of hands in the beginning. But I do think the litmus test is correct that Shashi outlays, like, will you let your child or whomever ride in a driverless car is probably the first step to robot integration in the home or otherwise. But, not this is the exact same, but many people, when Uber first came out, there was immediate resistance to like letting your child get in a car with a stranger, right? And then that, people still have reservations about that, but for the most part, that is now socially accepted. And in truth, bad things happen in Ubers. It's not a perfect system, but I mean, for the most part, Ubers are, go off without at least a ubiquity of problems. So.
Have you guys, this is jumping conversation so much. If you guys have been to SF, or I guess Austin also has them, but have you guys tried a Waymo, like the fully robo taxi?
Never.
I went to SF like a month ago, and apparently like you have to hop on a wait list like basically like a month in advance, and you kind of randomly get it. So I didn't get a chance. But I was kind of optimistic one of you had an opinion or anything, but seems like we'll have to save that for a future episode. I
did just see that they opened it up though to the public, so I don't know if the whole waitlist thing is an option. But yeah, that's a great place to leave it for this week. So we will see everyone next week. Thank you all for joining this one. As always, find us on the podcast channels and on YouTube. Leave your comments in the sections below, and we will see you all next week. Thanks. You would be